Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Very special show today. I'm super excited about this guest and the conversation we're about to have. Before we get started, we're going to bring the music back on for a second. Before we get started, it was so good we had to do it twice. The message of the week, and we're going to expound upon this a little throughout the show. When you learn to make adversity your ally, it becomes a superpower. With that, I'd like to bring on this gentleman today. He's had more senior management, CEO, and chairman positions than I could probably count on my fingers and toes. A long, long list of accomplishments. He's also an author of On the Road Less Traveled. Wonderful story, very applicable to today's situation. With that, I would like to welcome to the show Mr. Ed Hajim. Ed, how are you today?
I am terrific. Thank you for bringing me on your show.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. So what first attracted me to Ed was the fact that he went to the University of Rochester. He did his undergraduate there, as did my wife. And I lived on campus illegally for a little while. And we, just have a huge affection for the city and for the university. My wife's actually from Rochester. Her family's all from East Rochester. She ended up growing up in Canandaigua and Victor, just outside of the city. But ended up, she went to middle and high school there and ended up going to the University of Rochester. And similar to yourself, she was, her family was under huge financial constraint throughout her youth. And she ended up getting a full academic scholarship through the HEOP program and excelled. She was an excellent student and got a full academic ride there. And so it's helped, her success, which has helped my success. So I am forever indebted to the university. Plus that, that 6 months of free rent that I got while I was crashing in her university apartment.
Careful, they're going to come back and get that rent from you.
I might still have a few unpaid parking tickets too while we're at it. Yeah. So your story is intriguing in and of itself, but that was even more of a connection for me. So I don't want to give away too much of your book. Again, here it is, everybody, On the Road Less Traveled. I want people to actually buy it and read it. But we were just discussing before the show a little of the glory days of Rochester. I read a bit about how you ended up there, but I'm curious if you would elaborate a little bit more, because there were many options, and University of Rochester is not a very easy school to get into. So how did that kind of play out for you?
Well, when I decided to go to private college, I was in an orphanage, and that's why it's On the Road Less Traveled. Most of my peers were going to either public school or not going to college at all. And I decided to go to a private college. And people forget, in those days, you're only allowed to apply to 3 colleges. And I was sure that I was going to get the New York State scholarship. And so I applied to 3 New York State schools. Rensselaer and Cornell were my first choices. And the principal of the high school was a very big bull on Rochester. So I threw in Rochester. And when I didn't get the New York State scholarship, but I applied to every other scholarship. There weren't many in those days. I got the NROTC scholarship, which Rochester was on the list. And I called Cornell and they said, well, you will accept you into the NROTC program, but it'll take you 5 years. And I called Rensselaer and they said, it'll take you 5 years here too. Then I called Rochester and says, we'll get you through in 4. The small print I didn't read, which read, there'll be 6 8 o'clocks for 4 years, and you'll be in laboratory every afternoon, and you will take a summer course in order to get through. Plus the fact we'll flunk out 75% of your class, come to Rochester. So Rochester was my first real home. And, academic education beyond anybody's imagination was excellent, but also terrific extracurriculars and, Division III sports. So I played freshman baseball and basketball. Realized then that I would not be a professional athlete. That was because of my size. I thought that was the only reason that held me back. I did play intramural sports for the next 3 years, but the extracurriculars at Rochester really were spectacular, and they are now even more so. Like there are 250 clubs on campus now. But I just learned so much at Rochester from all the different activities. Engineering was tough enough. I mean, we started with 60 chemical engineers, ended up with only 6 of us graduating. Eventually about 15 of them graduated, but they really, we had this, I remember vividly, this physical chemistry professor in the old days, as you look to your left, look to your right, one of them will be gone. He said, both of them will be gone. That's how I got to Rochester. Didn't know anything about Rochester at all, but it was the other choice, and I had to make it. And I did get, once I decided to go, I got very good feedback. People said it was a very good place to go, and I enjoyed it. But after my freshman year, I had a very good experience. Freshman year was very tough on me.
Yeah, I was reading how you were describing your appearance. And I was spending time there in the late 90s, and even then that would have you kind of would have gotten a look, I can imagine what it was like when you were there. Like
my leather jacket didn't go over very well, and my haircut was a little bit unusual, and also my accent and my background, and I was rejected by every fraternity, which rush week was the first week of school, which really made you feel good. So you got rejected by everybody was a pretty good deal. Like one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm getting involved with coaching first gen kids to get through freshman year, because they don't flunk out academically, they flunk out socially. They get behind, they get down on themselves, and that's really the big negative. And I must say I got through somehow, friends, I guess, somehow, or just being in my background was so, unattractive that actually, as bad as the first year was, it was pretty good relative to everything else.
Right.
I mean, I went from living with 50 kids in a room to 3 kids in a room to just a roommate. So it was pretty good.
And I only experienced it from the periphery, but I would agree with you that the community there was spectacular, and it's very unique because it's isolated on the river campus, and gorgeous campus, Rush Reese.
Gorgeous campus, quintessential. Anybody who goes there, besides anybody who visits goes there. The campus is quintessential. It really is. It's beautiful.
And I felt like they did both of the schools I went to were state schools, and I didn't have that experience. And so hanging around there and just seeing, and my wife too, she was applied math. So she worked with a bunch of engineers, and I remember the pressure they were under. And, I had a propensity for, extracurricular activities outside of the university where they were like, no, we have to focus. And I was like, cool, I'm going to go. I'll catch you guys later.
And by the way, global warming is giving back Rochester May and October too. When I was there, by the time October came, you were snowed in. And in May, I was in charge of the spring weekend once. On June 1st, it snowed.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I grew up in the South, and I was there for commencement one year. It was the year before my wife graduated, and some friends of ours were graduating. So we were there, and it was May, and it snowed while we were out. It was outdoors, and it started snowing. And I'm like, what's happening here? I'm choosing to live here. This is happening by choice. It was a fun experience for sure, being around there. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you've held these senior management and chairperson positions and CEO positions for a lot of companies. But it seems to me, from reading the book, this was something you got started with at the University of Rochester. You got into everything you could.
I was Mr. Involved. Now, one thing I said about writing the book, you go back and figure out why you did what you did. And I kept busy in order not to. I sealed my background off when I went to Rochester. So I'm not telling anybody about my background. I was ashamed of it. I was embarrassed about it. I didn't want any sympathy. I didn't want anything special given to me because of my background. And therefore, I guess I got very busy. I was chairman of the finance board, which gave out all the money on campus. I was the business manager of the Dramatic Society, which had to fill the damn stadium, the auditoriums every year. I was an editor of the yearbook. I was chairman of the engineering council. I was social chair of my fraternity, which is the most difficult thing because every Saturday night you had to produce. But the biggest thing I did is in my junior year, taking physical and organic chemistry. I felt that Rochester was a place that, fun went to die, and I was going to change that. So I created a humor magazine, which everybody was against. The president, the provost, the head librarian. They said, this is not a good idea. But I did it. I put 30 people together, and we collected all the magazines from all over the country. We wanted to model ourselves after the Lampoon at Harvard. And, I learned an enormous amount about that. In fact, as I sort of changed my orientation in life. I was really a math and science guy. I loved all that. I mean, I love the smell of a science book. But that experience gave me a feeling that I really wanted to manage. I wanted to create. I got great kick out of putting people together to create a product or a project. And I learned one thing, which I recommend to everybody in life. If you get a chance at some time to sell something that doesn't exist to people you never met before, if you get that done, you're in good shape. We had to sell advertising in the magazine to the local gas station, the local bars and so forth. They never met me. They didn't know what I was selling and I had to sell it. But we had passion and we did get enough revenues to support the magazine. The first issue sold out in 45 minutes. And the crowning glory was the librarian running down to my office and asking for a couple of copies for the archives. So, but no, I got involved but it goes way back. If you read the book, you'll find out when I was in public school, PS 104 in Queens, the principal wrote a letter saying he was the captain of the guards, president of his class, and then I went into a little dip because of the orphanage situation, but I always loved to get involved with people. And it's not necessarily being the boss, but I found out that I got a terrific kick out of helping people do more than they thought they could. Have you ever been with somebody that you've helped do more than they thought they could in athletics, in the collaboratories, or classroom, or in business? You would get an enormous response. And of course, if you can surround yourself with hundreds of people, if you're working for a company, all of which are doing a little better than they think they could, you're okay. And that was my revelation. Now, I didn't realize that at the time. When I created the Humor Magazine, I was creating a humor magazine, but I started to recognize, looking back at that, that's when I first got my enthusiasm for putting people together to get a job done. That's what business is all about.
100%. And I do know that feeling, and we can elaborate on that a little bit more throughout the show. We're going to take our first break for now, though, so we'll be back in just a minute. Hang tight, Ed. All of you hang tight. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, once again, you're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Today, welcoming to the show, seasoned Wall Street executive and author of the new book, On the Road Less Traveled, Ed Hajim. First portion of the show, we were talking about the lovely University of Rochester, a place Ed and I both called home at a certain point. And Ed, was beautiful segue. You were talking about helping people. And when I was getting to know your story and reading the book and kind of understanding where you were coming from, I really thought a great way to angle this was in the book's ability to work as kind of a reference for people that need help. And you said it, you already ripped one of my quotes too. I wrote down, if you can sell something that does not yet exist to people you have never met before, you will have a leg up in life. So I'm going to sneak this one in before you take it. The pandemic may seem like an unlikely teacher. And I 100% agree with you that there's a tremendous feeling when you help people, when you have gone through the fire and you have a little understanding of what it takes, and you see somebody struggling and you know they have good intentions. It's a remarkable feeling. I mean, I've opened nearly a dozen businesses myself and pulled people up with me, and people from very meager beginnings and continue to do that. But I've noticed in the last year, there's an extra attention, an extra focus on that, because people got rocked. And I participate in a number of, weekly masterminds, and I don't know if you're on Clubhouse yet, if you've taken that dive, but a bunch of Clubhouse rooms, and it's all centering around this. There's a lot of people who realize, I think, the fragility of one, their health potentially, but also their professional existence. And it's made people really rethink what their future may look like. And for a lot of people, that's scary. And I don't come up as hard as you did, but it certainly wasn't easy either, and shuffled around a lot and split up parents. And, there was a lot of adversity. And like you, I think it only made me stronger and better prepared me for times like now. You had mentioned, did you go to high school in New York City? I know you lived all over the place, but.
I went to high school in Yonkers. I went to high school in Far Rockaway.
Okay.
For freshman year, and then in Yonkers, New York for my sophomore, junior, and senior year.
So
Yeah.
how did you end up in New York through all this meandering?
Well, that goes back to
journey.
my childhood. I was born in Los Angeles, and my father put me into foster homes when he went to the service, and he ended up on the East Coast. So when I was 10 years old, somehow he talked them into letting me fly across country 20 hours in a DC-10. United Airlines was not exactly what it is today. And I arrived in New York, and that was when I was 10 years old in 1946. And so I stayed in New York until,
Okay.
and the orphanages were in New York. And so I ended up going to high school and so forth. But, going back to what you just said about, I tried to figure out, and everybody says, what's the secret of getting through, what you got through? And in many respects, what I come down to is don't be a victim.
Right.
Always ask what's next. Look, and in my case, it was necessary. If I look back, it was too ugly. I couldn't handle it. Therefore, I buried it. So I always had to look forward. And I also took the position, don't be a victim. Go look forward. And this COVID thing, in many respects, one of the problems with it, if you look at our society for the last, God, I would say 30 or 40 years, there really hasn't been, 9/11, people in St. Louis they worried about 9/11, but it wasn't a big deal. New York was struggled with it. And the wars we've had have been sort of with volunteer services, but people went through the Depression and the Second World War and the recession after the Second World War. Those were big hits. And the people today have not had big hits. And this is a big hit. So if you take COVID and put it into a positive syndrome, and I try to send this message up to the University of Rochester, actually, talking to the president, I said, what's positive about COVID? And when you have a really difficult situation, like a war or depression, positive things come out of it. I mean, the technology that came out of the Second World War, unbelievable. The social changes that came out of depression, it really changed the whole society. So try to look at the positives of COVID. In many respects, there's huge positives. It's going to change medicine completely. University of Rochester, for example, the number of telemedicine calls made went up almost 1,000. It went from 40 to 4,000. And that changes the difference between getting in your car, driving in the snow, getting to the hospital, getting to the parking lot, going to to getting on a TV set, like you and I talk like you and I to the doctor, piece of cake. Now they can't do certain kinds of things, but that's going to come too. But telemedicine will change. Education is going to change enormously.
Yeah.
So if you look at these things, these are huge opportunities. I mean, even recreational, what I call rec tech, recreational technology is changing enormously. I mean, I watch my grandchildren; they're the whole different stuff coming across their boxes now.
Yeah.
And so, and puzzles have gone crazy. People, and I think families have been pulled together. I always kid about this. My wife doesn't like it, but I said, I live with a pretty nice woman. I learned about that this time, because you're stuck with her for the whole time. You're not going to work every day, and so forth. So I think there's just, a lot. And then, of course, today, there's so many opportunities. I mean, AI, or artificial intelligence, virtual reality, artificial reality, genomics, going to change everything. Nanoscience. I mean, there was some guy showing me the other day, says, we're going to have clothing that react to the weather. So you don't have to have winter and summer clothing. The clothing will react to the weather. I mean, there's just enormous opportunities today in the world. And that's what people have to focus on. And the whole change in the workplace. I mean, some real estate companies may be hurt because office space may be a little less in demand, but urban office space is going to go up big time. And, so I think, and also housing have changed. My secretary, instead of getting a 1-bedroom apartment, new house, she's going to get 2 bedrooms. She'll have her office in that other bedroom. So there's a whole bunch of changes which are that's going to help good for the building industry and so on and so forth. So COVID is not positive, but what, I hate to say it, we're analyzing this right now. What came after the 1918 Spanish flu? The Roaring 20s. I mean, so I don't want to get there, but don't, something can happen here. You got to be very careful that people were so negative, they swing the other way and become very positive. Yeah. You could have a heck of a decade, which people are not predicting at this point in time. So I don't want to get. I mean, I've always felt that what satisfied me. I've always tried to look at the positive. I've always tried to look what's next. And that's what I preach. And I tell kids that that basically, freshman year is hell, but after that, it's okay. And your first year, a couple of years in a job may not be so good either. But you got to constantly, Scott Peck, my book, he wrote the Road Less Traveled. I wrote On the Road Less Traveled, because that's what I've traveled, the road that very people have traveled. Anyway, he talks about delayed gratification. You got to put in your time.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky because I had such a bad background. Really all my disadvantages became advantages. If you live in 15 or 20 places before you're 18 years old, guess what happens? You get to be adaptable. You can adapt to things more easily. One of the problems with people today is they live in one neighborhood, they go to one high school, and then something changes and they get anxiety because they have change is exciting for me. I mean, look at it. It looks like my resume that I couldn't keep a job, but I kept changing when E.F. Hutton wouldn't do what I wanted him to do, I went to Lehman Brothers. When Lehman Brothers threw me out, I went, off the firm itself. But going to a new place didn't bother me. And I can go through the descriptions. Some of the changes I made, like Lehman Brothers, I was a senior partner, and my office overlooked the entire harbor. And the dining room was one of the finest dining rooms in the United States. It was unbelievable. The King of Spain was there, the head of the Federal Reserve, and so forth. I rang a buzzer on my desk. Guy would come in with my iced tea in the morning. When I went to Furman Cells, which was the next job, my office overlooked that brick wall you have in the back there, right there. Our dining room was 2 hot plates in the conference room. And when I rang and pushed the button to get the iced tea, bell went off in my chair. And I got up and I got it. So but that didn't bother me because I loved what I was doing. I had a small company. I became the the sort of the manager, the CEO, the chairman. And it was my thing. I went from 200 people to 70 people, from 20 million in profits to 20 million in revenues. But it was what I wanted to do. But change was okay for me. The only thing I haven't changed is my wife. 55 years in. As her call too. She hung in there.
Right. It's funny. I wasn't a very good student in grade school. I did well in college, but the one thing I remember just vividly was a science class in maybe 8th or 9th grade, and the teacher said the only thing consistent in the world is change. Now she was applying it to science, but I was already thinking practically, and it was just one thing that stuck with me, and I've just embraced that as well. And I think
you say change is also, but technological change. You have technological change though, has all kinds of reverberations. I mean, the whole industry is open up for people who can handle the social change which technology produces.
Yeah.
There's a whole section of training course. The whole training industry has got to change.
Oh, yeah.
I look at this thing as an enormous change. Then there's a whole aging population. I mean, what I try to convince kids is, let's look for the next wave, whatever it might be. Get that wind at your back. Find a trend or a cycle or an unsatisfied demand or a latent unsatisfied need or latent demand. I kid about this in the golf course when I created a golf course in Nantucket. There was latent demand for golf. There was no golf courses, and they needed a golf course. So everybody says, you're crazy, it's too expensive. No, there was just a lot of people that wanted to do that, and so it was good. And I think that if people focus on that instead of focusing today, COVID is terrible. There's no two ways about it. And it's a horrible experience, but it's something we will get over. And I think that if you start to think about the positives and try to take advantage of it, then it'll become a little less. But I do believe this staying at home has had some positive changes. I mean, I spent 3 weeks with my grandchildren. They were on virtual. I had to increase the broadband in the house by 5 times, but no, I was with them for 3 weeks, and it was really kind of a good experience.
Yeah.
Where my daughter kind of she's been very busy, so we got a chance to really spend some time with her. And so, fine. And I kid about that. My wife and I think are closer than we've ever been.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, we're gonna take another break. Hang tight. We'll be right back.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, we're hopping right back into it, talking today with author of On the Road Less Traveled, Ed Hajim. And I wanted to double back to something you were just saying at the end of the last segment. One of my mentors says this often: a problem is an opportunity. And you've been talking about, you mentioned it in your book too, taking 2 people from the same circumstances, one will rise and the other one will play the victim. Where, I don't know where, I don't want to say where because I don't want to give too much of the book away, but coming from the mindset portion of the book, because again, I think this is a really great reference for people. It's entertaining, it's a great story, but there's so many great messages in there for your mindset. First of all, what was, kind of the impetus behind writing the book? And then how did you slip those little messages in there?
Well, it's an odyssey. I started at 18 years old. I decided I would basically bury my background. All the psychologists will tell you that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But this way, I didn't have to deal with it. I mean, the Horatio Alger kids, I say, when you go to college, there's a line drawn. You can let it hang out like they do, most kids do today, or just put it away and say, I'm not going to deal with that. And I didn't have to deal with my father. I didn't have to deal with my background, orphanages, all that stuff. But then I went 55 years later, I became the chairman of the board of trustees of the University of Rochester. And I decided I had to give a big gift. And I said, I'm going to give it anonymously. They said, oh, no, we got to find out about you and publicize you and use you and so forth. Simultaneously, my daughter in particular, who worked for Fortune at the time, and my two sons and my wife said, we've got to have a record. We got to bring it forward, because they really didn't know all the facts. I buried it enough that it wasn't there. And so I decided to, write the book. And as I started to write it, and the first galleys I sent out to people, they said exactly what you said. There's some messages in there that should be more than just for your family. And then I started to learn things. It's when you write a book, first of all, being an engineer, not a great writer, but you write things down, you say, is this what I really mean? And then when you say, if I add this, are the people going to read it, going to understand exactly what you said? Then there's a whole other problem. What you remember and what the facts are really different. I kept all the letters from my father, and when he died, he kept all the letters from me. So I had all the information. Actually, my daughter had to go into it because some aspects I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
There's certain things in your life that are just so traumatic that when you go back and read about them, they just don't, you can't handle them. So I didn't handle that. But then when I got into it, I found out that there really were some messages, just like this victim concept. If you can just say to yourself, don't be a victim, whatever anybody does to you, go on to the next step. Because the victim takes you down, you get spiraling down, you get mad at the person. And, luckily I had anger. The positives were I gained a lot of advantages from my disadvantages. Adaptability, resilience, muscle. Resilience is a muscle. You use it more, it gets more perseverance. And what you just talked about, empathy. When you deal with someone from the background, you can empathize with it. And then finally, gratitude. You get a lot of gratitude. Anyway, so when you come back to this whole process, you have these. Also, I was anger, but my anger was inwardly thrust. I was basically angry at myself. And so when there's somebody that comes up and treats you badly, don't be a victim. Look forward, take whatever anger and place it into doing what's next. And the golf course, you get a kick out of that. I got rejected by all the golf courses. So what do? You build your own golf course, and there is nothing, Jeremiah, nothing like walking up to the snack bar. And when the little girl says to you, what's your number? You say, number one. So, that was it. I mean, all my life, that's an added thing that, that just is so special in my life today, because you go into this golf course and we have 300 families which are happier than they would have been otherwise. Yeah. They wouldn't be able to play golf on the island. So, it's a great, and I don't give book to, my wife says, don't give too much of the book away. Nobody will buy it. I said, well, who knows? There's some good tidbits in there, though, but you're right. But I found out more and more as I started to do it, I came up with these things. And so and now it's starting to build. And then what I'm getting is people like you talk to me and you give me extra thoughts. One young man just crossed me the other day. He said, do you think you're lucky or blessed? And I responded immediately. I said, both. And so that brought a whole new section, a whole new spectrum into my thinking. And so many people have also referenced their lives. That was the first thing I got back. He said, well, I know I did that, or I had this, and so it's really kind of interesting to me. So those are the kinds of reasons that sort of came up, but they did evolve. I mean, I didn't have them when I started writing the book.
Yeah,
I had some of them, obviously, but not all of them.
It's great. And I agree. Just the little bit I read, I saw myself in the book, so many experiences that I can relate to. And I think, again, as I said at the beginning of the show, I think I'm encouraging people to think of it more of as a reference material, because you're going to constantly face adversity, right? The adversity doesn't go away. You don't get through it one time.
Nobody gets through without being kicked around a little bit.
Right. Nobody. You said adversity is a gift. If you never experience it, you'll never know how to overcome it, meaning that it's coming back. It's not one and done. It's coming back. It's a recurring theme.
Here's a counterintuitive for you. Failure is a gift if you get it early enough.
Yeah. If
you get it early enough. In my book, I failed big time at age 35, and it was the biggest gift ever. that saved my life for the rest of my business career, because I learned some real experience. I got some real experience in that. Oh, you got, everything went to hell for a while. I had to look around for a new life. So, I think those are the kinds of things. And people say, well, I brought my kid like I did my children in Greenwich, Connecticut, at great schools. How do I give them the same experience? You got to make it a lot of artificial, but there are things like Outward Bound, Knowles National Leadership School. Have them work in a hospital or even mow grass. One of the great experiences of all times was my daughter in her between college and high school drove an ice cream truck. Nothing is more difficult than driving an ice cream truck. She arrives at the house with this pink ice cream truck. She says, Dad, I'm in the ice cream business. I said, great. She says, I got to plug it in tonight. I said, darling, plugging in 220 when we haven't got any 220. I found an electrician about 11 o'clock at night to rejigger our house so we could plug it. Then she had to sell the stuff, and she had to have the thing empty but every afternoon and go back to fill it up, because if she took it back full up, they'd take it away from her and give it to somebody else. Yeah. Great experience. And she had a partner that didn't kind of work out so well. So, you learn all this stuff. But that's what I think is great about the book. Is a reference. There's no two ways about it. It really sends a definite message that anything is possible, that education truly is the answer to everything or almost everything. Partnership is extremely important, especially in today's society. I think P1, you can find somebody to share your life with. I don't know what kind of deal you have, but there are different deals today than when I was a young man. But still, I think that having someone who's interested in you, who you can support you, is very important. And then in anything you do, in fact, if you look at my book, again, a reference, you'll find out I succeeded a number of times and I failed a number of times. And there is one constant in my failure. Either I didn't have a partner or the right partner. So partnership, you're only as good as the people who you surround yourself with, almost by definition. So those are the kinds of things that sort of came to me as I went through it. And you'll find at the end of the book something called the 4 Ps, which I'm writing a second book on right now. It's actually been written, but we're going to wait a while and see how this one goes first.
Yeah. And this was just released, right? This just came out last month.
March the 2nd.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really amazing. Totally agree that, you talked about helping people, and how do you help people? Well, you have to have failed yourself, right? And same, I went through a number of businesses that just did not work out. And now I have people that I've been a consultant in various degrees over the last 10 years, but the more, the more you fail, the more you learn. And then you can help them.
You can see things now that people couldn't see before, because you've been there, done that. I remember one great story about a friend of mine who wanted to go into business with a guy who was exporting cars from Cyprus to Africa. I said, no, that never works. There's never any cars. Because I'd gone through that before. Someone called me, this is a great deal. This guy has got these cars. I said, no, those are things you don't do. There's certain kinds of things you don't do. Or, when the guy phonies his resume, no, don't give him another break.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what's so wonderful about experience. And so in my book also, being a reference, I just reached out for experience at all times. Mm-hmm. When I wanted to be an international businessman, I took the first opportunity to work overseas.
Right.
And found out it wasn't for me. I loved it, but it wasn't for me.
You often learn what you want to be by checking off what you don't want to be, right? I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. Gentleman is 25. He's in finance. He's got a good gig, but he was offered a new one, and it's in the direction he wants to go, but he's nervous. It's that change factor. And I just said to him, you're not going to know unless you try.
Did you read the chapter? You didn't read the chapter on gophers and eagles.
Not
One
yet,
of my pitches to kids is, don't tell me what they call it. What do you do Monday morning physically? What do you do morning? Being a difference between an investment banker and being an analyst. When I got out of school, analysts are gophers. Of course, gophers get on airplanes and fly around and visit people, and investment bankers are sitting there waiting for somebody to throw something on your desk and help a guy out. Totally different business.
Yeah.
So find out what you do Monday morning, and also find out how much responsibility you have. These are the kinds of lessons that are in the book. And I prove the positive and the negative. When I didn't do it right, it turned out exactly bad for
me. Right.
Oh, there's one great lesson in there. You can do everything right and still get kicked out. At Lehman Brothers, that's my story there. I did everything just right, and sure enough, 7 years later, I was out on the street.
It's interesting too that a lot of the messages mirror the messages taught in martial arts. I've been, for most of my life, I've been in and out of martial arts and physical activity, but for the last 6 years, been very focused. And for me, that was one of the best takeaways. I was fit when I started, but they constantly say it centers around don't be a victim. You know, don't just accept someone invading your space. But then when you get into it, it's all these lessons that, you know, adversity is your ally, you know, pressure makes diamonds. And I'm reading the book and I'm like, you're a martial artist. You might not know it, but you're a martial artist.
No, I know the ability to take a blow,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not and make your opponent realize that you're not paying attention to it. It's a whole mentality, really.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting from the whole thing. I said at the very beginning of the pandemic, because I'm in combat sports, and a lot of people that I know and live around me, they're aware of that. And I said in March of last year, everybody's chin's about to get tested. We're gonna see who can take a clip and keep moving.
I think there'll be some healthy returns there. People will be able to overcome this, and they'll feel good about it. No, it's and you don't want to have adversity, but when you have it, and it's not your fault, you can really gain from it enormously. Yeah. I mean, I look back at a lot of the things that really some of my great successes were because of the disadvantages that I had. Really, disadvantages become advantage. Malcolm Gladwell writes about this as well. I'm not the first person to talk about this. So.
All right. We got one more break. Let's take it. Let's come back and we'll wrap this baby up. All right. Hang tight, everybody. We'll be right back. All right. Continuing this wonderful conversation today with author of On the Road Less Traveled, Ed Hajim. I want to wrap up with something else you said in the book. And I think this is just real great fodder for people because often, you don't know how to get to where you want to go, but if you know why you're doing it in the first place, the how will eventually reveal itself. You said when you operate on passion, it isn't work, it's pleasure. And I think people need to figure that out right now because a lot of people are just trying to work. But if they can figure out a way to incorporate their passion, because there are times, especially, as a business owner, you don't always get paid.
That's right.
I was asked two things the other day in a clubhouse room by a very successful entrepreneur. And he said, what two things would you go back and tell your young self, knowing what you know now as you were getting into entrepreneurship? And the first one, you mentioned it earlier, was you're not alone. Find good partners. You're never alone anyways. So don't pretend like you are.
That's right.
Partner up, find people that are going to support you, and you'll be okay. And the second one was that you don't get paid every 2 weeks. Not always. Sometimes you do, but they're the payroll company for
cash flow is king.
Yeah, the payroll company for entrepreneurship has a different cycle than the rest of the world. So sometimes all you have left is passion. Can you digress on that a little bit?
Well, first of all, very important. I think in my book, I talk about find your passions. But the second, and passion is an overused word, but because it's your talents, it's your interest, and it's the context you're in. But also take your passions and early on describe them. I mean, not when you want to be an astronaut or a fireman and so forth, but somewhere in your high school period, figure out what your passions are. Mine were math, science, baseball, basketball, and girls. And I'm not allowed to say that in the book, but that was true. And they morph, and you got to keep track of them. So in college, math and science morphed into engineering and then finally into chemical engineering. But I say in my junior year, my passion started to even change a little bit more. And they became, I really like the business, I like the organizing of people and so forth. So my passions, so keep track of those passions. That's why I believe you should write down your passions, and keep track of them. And you'll find out that they will change. And when they change, if you exercise them, you'll be home free. If you keep going back to the past passions, they may not work as well. And passions also change with context. Context is very important. What period of history are you in? Are you in a depression? Are you in a war? If you look at the difference between my life and my father's life, he was born in 1900, I mean. Those 70 years, pretty awful years. I mean, he had the 20s is about all he had. He had the Spanish flu, the First World War, then a couple of good years. Then the Depression, then the Second World War, then the post-war, which was tough, and so on, and then the 70s, which weren't great. Look at the difference in my life. I've had 30 or 40 years of just up. I mean, everybody says, oh, you did a great job with your last company. But my company went up 20 times in 14 years. Pretty special. Stock market went up 10 times during that same period. So you had the wind at my back. So, so you take your passions and also put them against, if you can marry your passions to your context, you're really home free. And your passions have to be modified too, a little bit. So, and it's many interests and capabilities. You may have a passion to play the piano and be tone deaf. You got to pay attention to these kind of things. And then, of course, my second is use your principles. You may have certain passions which really don't fit with your principles. Those things happen. And then you have your partner. I mean, I always tell the story about the fellow who he loved Alaska. He loved gold mining, and he married a woman who hated the cold.
Not a winning combination.
You got to put them together. So, but the passions is very important, because when you really, I love going to work. I mean, I spent 14 years as the CEO of a small investment bank, and every day was exciting. Yeah. And I like take we were entrepreneurs. We really weren't a company. Guy would come in and say, I want to do this. I said, here's a desk, here's a telephone. See me in 3 months.
Right.
Exactly right.
I want to go back to something you were just talking about, the historical context. I was in another interview on another gentleman's show with author Chris Kelso. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He just released a book on the imposter syndrome, but he said this during the show, and it kind of relates to what you just said. I'm curious to get your feedback. He said, he didn't quote this. He's somebody else said it, but he was just resharing it. Hard times create strong men create easy times create weak men create hard times, and the cycle continues. So you were just talking about, like, we've had this great run, and I talk about it all the time, because even in the relatively short time I've been in business, it's kind of been going up and up and up, and I've been waiting, and I've I know it doesn't stay that way, and you have to be on the lookout for kind of the telltale signs. What are your thoughts on that quote?
Oh, it's a perfect quote. The thing that's left out is the time. Because you go through a whole lifetime and there are only weak men, and you go through a whole lifetime and there's only strong men.
Right.
And and those are the kinds of things you have to worry about. I mean, I always tell the story. I used to predict the stock market. I was a strategist, and guys would ask me, how long is it going to take until you get to this? If I knew that, do you think I would tell you?
No, right?
No, the timing is very important, and we're in a period now of unusual circumstances. And I always say to people, you've got to sort of analyze what you're in. And what we're in is a period of these very low interest rates, which is historic. And until that changes, it's probably going to be still up. You're printing money and so forth. Yeah. But it will come to an end, and you will test people again.
Yes.
And people, I think one of the things, the definition of strong men and strong men become weak when things have been too good for a while, and weak men become strong because of adversity. So there's a little difference between he and I think, on that basis. During tough times, really, people really they pull together and they change. As I did.
I've seen it. I mean, in the past year, I've seen some remarkable.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's funny, people that I thought would come into it chest out weren't, like you were just saying. Right. And then people that I thought maybe they're not going to pull much off in this have been really, really astonishing. So, given that a lot of, especially the younger people today, are coming up in an era where it's been relative prosperity, what's like one piece of advice you would give them, kind of looking into the future, that it's probably going to be a little bumpy. It's probably not going to be it's not going to be like the last 10 years were, or let's say even like 2009 to 2020. What's like one little bit of advice you would just give to people that are
focus on the change, focus on the change, and find what part of the change you want to participate in. And there are enormous changes now, no matter what kind of your talent you have. Even if you're not a technology person and you want to focus on the old age population, which is huge. There are huge changes going on. Find out what part of that change you want to participate in and go for it. And then keep monitoring yourself to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time.
Right. Because you can't change it all, right? It's impossible to change it all.
But you can say, this is where I'm going to go. And you may not get paid the most for a while. It may not be the most, prestigious situation, but if you really love what you're doing and it's part of some bigger change, if you want to really study China, it takes you a long time to learn the Chinese language. That's part of the game. If you want to, if you want to study technology, you're going to have to go and get a degree in some sort of technology. But I do believe that there's enough change right now, and also the market has almost quadrupled in size, because when I was a young man, the international was sort of wishy-washy. Today it's available. And also the internet. You can create a community almost overnight. And the big thing that we had was capital. Today you can do a lot of things without capital. And so there's a lot of positives today that we didn't have. And then, of course, for young people, there's more scholarship money than there ever has been. So, when I went to school, and I got an NRTC scholarship, there are only 1,200 of them in the country. So, today, half the kids get half their school paid for. So, and there's also, my biggest kick right now is vocational education. I'm going back into, I think we need to train people to do all kinds of things that they love to do, rather than sending them off to college,
Yes, 100% agree. We got to bring
But and my advice to people is find a change, find something that in the change where marries to your passion, and go for it. And spend 3 to 5 years doing it, put your head down, and then wake up, go down to someplace in the Caribbean, walk around on the beach and say, did I do the right thing? If not, change. If you did, keep going.
And 3 to 5 years, not 3 to 5 months.
No, 3 to 5. There's a rites of passage in everything you do. And you got to learn the system before you can really find out whether you're good or bad at it. No, seriously, or whether it's yours or not. I've never, most of the only thing I changed quickly was when I was an engineer. My buddy made me say, you got to go to business school. And I was going to business school at night anyway. And I've been an engineer for 3 years in the Navy, so I knew what that was about. But really, you should change less than 3 to 5 years. And every year evaluate, but on a 3-year basis, really go in deep, write down. When they asked me the other day, what would one thing you tell a senior in college today? Write a business plan for your life. For your life. Yeah. Right now, where do you want to be 25 years from now? And draw a line between now and then. I mean, we did this once in midlife with a seminar, and my wife says, I want to look at water. Well, within 25 years, we had 3 places to look at water. So, you can do that if you have time. And there are cycles that you can take advantage of. And I always think, well, I can't afford this. Well, wait, there'll be a time when that condominium in Florida or in Nantucket gets really cheap. And if you save a little bit of money, you can do it.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. So, On the Road Less Traveled, everyone. It's available on all major distribution platforms. You can get it digitally. You can get a hard copy like I have.
And also it's Audible now too.
Right, Audible.
The guy who reads it is very good.
Nice.
He's very good. I'm a big Audible man now because I was always a slow reader. So
yeah, very nice. So read it not just once, read it multiple times. Use it as a reference for all your adversity, for your goals. Thank you so much, Ed. It's been a true pleasure. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jeremiah. Thank you very much. Say hello to your wife and me.
I will, for sure.
Tell her she got a better education than her husband,
She knows that already. She knows.
Jeremiah, it's been fun. Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
May the fourth be with you.
Thank you. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll check in with you next week. Peace out.
Peace. Take care.